Brian, you can still hear me fine, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
I'm good. Yeah, I think we're going to get started. So we'd like to welcome you and thank you for joining us for this installment of the Groundwater Foundation's webinar series, co-sponsored by the Water Research Foundation. In order to achieve the Groundwater Foundation's mission of educating and motivating people to care for and about groundwater, the Groundwater Foundation is offering these monthly webinars. While we continue to offer some conferences, seminars, and workshops, we feel this webinar series offers us the opportunity to provide valuable resources to you at minimal cost and at no travel expenses. My name is Brian Reitz, and I'm a program coordinator here at the Groundwater Foundation in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I'll be hosting today's Groundwater Foundation webinar, Communicating the Value of Water. I just wanted to walk you through one of the features that we'll be using during the course of today's event. It's the chat feature. If you'd like to ask a question of me or any of Ed during the course of the webinar, please type your question into the chat box just to the left of the send button in the bottom right-hand section of your screen. I'll monitor the questions throughout the presentation, and then we'll address as many of them as possible during the Q&A segment at the end of the presentation of Ed's today. I'm just going to type in just a hi message there in the bottom so you kind of see how that will appear on your screen. And we'll talk about that again a little bit later. So today's topic is communicating the value of water with Ed Means. Ed is Vice President with Malcolm Pirnie. He has over 30 years of experience, including 18 years in the public sector with the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, in roles including Water Quality Laboratory Manager, Director of Water Quality, Director of Resources, Chief of Operations, Chief Operating Officer, and Acting General Manager. He is knowledgeable in water quality and water resources development and has worked for many large water agencies in the U.S. He's a skilled facilitator, having managed over a dozen complex facilitations. He has published over 100 articles in industry journals and 2 books on water resources management and quality issues. So, with that, I want to welcome Ed.
Great. Thank you, Brian, and good afternoon to all of the participants. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all today and the Groundwater Foundation for hosting this. I would like to acknowledge the Water Research Foundation for the funding of this project, Communicating the Value of Water, that resulted in a document, a report by that name, and an introductory guide to communicating the value of water. I also want to just note that John Rutten was a member of the project team, helped with some of the branding issues that I'll allude to here. And then we got great support from a number of water utilities, and I won't do an inclusive list here, but including the San Diego County Water Authority, Cincinnati Water Works, Tampa Bay Water, LA Department of Water and Power, Newport News, and others. The public outreach and professionals participated in this. So really appreciate there. Now, Brian, I don't see the presentation actually up here. It's perhaps it's one of the other tabs on here. I don't know if our participants can actually see it either.
Yeah, are you able to click on that tab up above yours?
Yeah, there we go.
The final one?
All right, very good. Yeah, we're all set. All right, what we want to begin talking about is really kind of the motivation behind getting organized with regard to communicating the value of water. And it has some very positive attributes. I mean, we're in an environment where water rates are going to double or triple in water and wastewater utilities over the next 20 years. And in many areas, that dramatic trend has begun in earnest. The support from the public for those rate increases is linked directly to ensuring long-term investment in water services and resources. And the practical reality is we need that support from those public entities, and in order to provide that support, they need to understand what we do and appreciate and understand the value of that water. In addition, we have the reality of building confidence within the community, and not just the public. It's the water utility itself. It's leadership, confidence in the employees and the activities that they do day in and day out, somewhat the unsung heroes in the delivery of water. Communicating the value of water also, at the end of the day, if you do it effectively, will assist the public in understanding how important it is to use that resource wisely, and that being and engaging in sustainable water practices, whether it's watering your lawns or your drought-tolerant landscaping or the kinds of appliances that you can put in for indoor conservation measures, there'll be a significant drive and appreciation and implementation, ultimately, of these practices as more and more people understand the kind of the big picture. When you go out and you look at what the literature says on communicating the value of water, there's some sort of fundamentals here, and there's some somewhat obvious things, I think common sense things. Water utilities deliver a product, certainly, but they're not often viewed as kind of delivering a widget. They are viewed as really providing a service. And when you look in the technical literature on service firms, and they put it rather succinctly here on the slide, but the key to service firms' success is rather simple, and it's rather obvious too, and that's keeping customers happy. So implicit in that is understanding what makes customers happy, and aligning all of your actions as a water or wastewater utility to providing those things and reinforcing them and using every opportunity you have to communicate those those attributes. The literature also indicates that any kind of business, whether it's delivering a product or a service, requires for folks to appreciate that, requires there to be a certain level of credibility that the business has, that they are viewed as upholding a set of values that are consistent with what the community values, and that what they say they'll do, they do, and that they operate in a fashion that's transparent. Several bullets here underscore those credibility elements, the transparent communications, making sure that you're viewed as a trustee of those physical assets and financial and human resource assets on behalf of the community. So in effect, you are there to serve, and obviously you're running a business in the process and providing a service. Basically treating the customers as owners. And so this, I guess, kind of gets to this issue of transparency and responsiveness. We'll talk more about that later. And then finally, being viewed as being not on an environmental platform per se, but basically the actions that you take are not destructive of environmental values, especially those that the community appreciates and sets as goals in their own policies. And then we have the whole issue of the utility understanding what those values are. And a lot of times, in most cases, employees work and live in the community, so by and large they are a microcosm of that, but it's rather easy to get kind of caught up in doing the utility business and sometimes losing sight of those broader issues taking place in the community. And what's important to recognize is, in our stakeholder base, in our utilities, we have a whole range of generations. We have the World War II kind of era folks that might be very conservative in the way they look at money. They might be, have a certain level of expectations of the utility that might be very different from a group of folks that have just graduated from college, and every generation has its attributes. So my point is that over time, those attitudes can shift as generations succeed and move into engagement in community affairs, move into political positions that all of a sudden now are dictating to the utility direction. So keeping track of what those values are, how they change, what's important, and aligning your actions against those values, or minimum being aware that your actions are incongruous with those values. So building this positive social image, aligning yourself again with those values, treating that natural environment as a community asset, and being good stewards of financial resources, not being viewed as wasting money or being tagged with frivolous expenditures, even though they're minor and they're really a more exceptional than routine. Those kinds of things really would destroy credibility. The literature also talks about this issue of brand. And branding is not the same as advertising. Branding involves those kinds of investments that you make as a utility, the kinds of notions that you communicate to the public about the value you provide. And probably one of the best examples, if John were on the call, he would talk about Volvo and the brand that Volvo has. And everyone views Volvo from the standpoint of their safety record, and that's the brand that they've developed. And if you think about other major business entities out there, they do denote a brand. Probably one of the best examples of branding gone awry is the Tiger Woods situation now. An individual really still at the top of their golf game, but was positioned as an individual with a certain kind of brand, and recent activities have tarnished that. So, brands take a long time to build. They can be damaged in very short order if you're not careful. Branding is based on judgments, and the public makes judgments about your actions, about your policies, about your costs, your prices. Collectively, what you want is a positive and consistent brand out there, and doing that will help you in the long run overcome any kind of negative impressions. All brands suffer a beating now and then, but the idea is to set up a system that has all your actions aligning with what those core brand commitments are, if you will, and be consistent as possible in delivering on those promises. So a good brand basically has a series of attributes. It's simple. It's memorable. For utilities, it frequently aligns directly with what we refer to in strategic planning as sort of your overarching goals or your guiding principles. For utilities, often these principles revolve around issues of providing reliable infrastructure, providing affordable rates, operating sustainably, or some other environmental ethic. Sometimes there are goals associated with communications and stakeholder engagement, and other areas as well. Generally, those brands are fairly simple. They're fairly straightforward. You do a lot of things to accomplish those overarching goals, but the goals more often than not, really become your brand commitment statements. Those are communicated consistently, so they're not just something that appears on the wall in the foyer to your administrative headquarters, but they're actually embedded in the actions you take in your capital program execution, in your funding requests, in your public relations materials related to completion of a project. Those are all opportunities, kind of teachable moments to tie those activities back to the 4 or 5 or 6 things that you promised to the community. And of course, living up to that brand is pretty important. It's one thing to say that we are environmentally responsible, and then actions that are taken by the board or staff don't gel with that. And the public's very, I think, willing to be supportive, but also can turn very quickly when you're detected as not living up to those things that you're promising. And of course, there's the issue of targeting those brand messages to those that you want to reinforce. And it's a huge science and an art in terms of communicating those brand statements. Every community has a very broad and diverse set of stakeholders that span economic, span ethnic, span philosophic or political, philosophies, and understanding what those individuals and those groups value, and then making sure that you're meeting those needs, or at least understanding when you're not meeting those needs is an important part of communicating the brand. And the process is dynamic. These things change over time, what people want and need from their utility. So these are not one-time kinds of engagements. It's really keeping in close touch with what the community values, emphasizing those brands, and making sure that your actions underscore those meeting those commitments. I'll give you an example of kind of branding that this appeared on one of the top Madison Avenue advertising firm websites, and they were very proud of it. This was a firm that had done some of the heavy-duty marketing work for Aquafina, which is Pepsi's bottled water brand. This ran about 8 or 9 years ago. You may have seen it. But what they did and tried to do here is you'll see through a series of frames that essentially represents the primary images that were depicted in this advertising, basically, and this ran on MTV. So they were really targeting specifically the 18 to 24-year old demographic. They wanted these folks to be bottled water drinkers and figured, get them early and get them, convinced that bottled water is a good thing and you can have them for life kind of thing. So the first image, is a young man. He's very tired from a vigorous workout and peers into the bottle and it's empty, and the superimposition, the voiceover rather, says pure frustration, so not enough water. I'm really frustrated. It's associated with a very active, sports activity. The second is on a boat, an attractive woman holds up a bottle and gestures and says pure temptation. So they're tying it to romance. And then the third ties it to artistry. You've got a man, he's mulling over these Aquafina bottles scattered around, and they're building this kind of bottle sculpture kind of thing. And it says the superimposition says pure genius. And then moving on, you've got, a woman pouring a bottle of water, chilled water over a man's head. It says pure ecstasy. And then finally the superimposition on the screen says Aquafina pure water. So now if you look at that, and this all occurs in the matter of about, I think this was about a 1-minute spot at most, maybe it was even 30 seconds. But the key things that they're emphasizing in brand are the fact that they're associating it with the good things in life, right? They're associating it with artistic creativity, with romance, and with purity. And you'll note the word purity. I mean, you don't hear the voiceover in here, but pure was mentioned a number of times, and the bottom line was the purest part of you. And so the point in showing you all of this is that when a large Fortune 500 company decides to take on an ad campaign, they are very, very methodical in their development of that campaign. These kinds of ads might be $5 to $10 million to run, to buy the ad time. So they don't, blow that without really understanding a couple things. One is who they're trying to reach, and two, did they reach them? So these kinds of things are market tested well in advance of buying airtime. They know that they work because they've run them in front of focus groups, many focus groups typically. And what doesn't work in the ad, they go back to the drawing board and fix it. So at the end of the day, when it runs, it is generally effective. And this is the point for us in the water and wastewater business, is to be more strategic about these things as we think about doing, branding and talking about the things that we're doing to meet and communicate the value of water and meet the expectations of the community. So let's move on. One part of the project, I had the project team going out and actually talking to customers and to utility leadership and elected and appointed officials and the media. And let me actually back up. The customer part was literature review piece. The other three were actually some discussions and interviews with those other three groups. And I want to share with you just some of the kind of bottom line from those interactions. And each one of these four interest groups are very unique. And they have their own issues. And so understanding those issues are important if you're going to try to communicate, get through. What do they know? What don't they know? What are they confused about? What kinds of information would they like to have? If you ask customers, and again, this is from the literature, a number of surveys that have been done, some of them with literally thousands of individual customers, there's typically four things that they really want. And safe water is right at the top of the list. So when you're communicating the value of the things you do as a utility, probably emphasizing the safety of the water that you provide, the expense and effort that you go to make sure it's safe. These are things that are going to resonate with what the customer wants. you're a utility with a history of outages and frequent problems in the system that have questioned the reliability, you're really running fundamentally against one of the key things that customers want. So you need to get that resolved. But fair and accurate bills. Fairness is in the eye of the beholder. Obviously, everyone has a different idea of what affordable or fair may be, but they certainly expect accurate bills. And I'll talk more about billing here in a few minutes. And then efficient customer service. And efficient is obviously has a number of different elements. I mean, one is you are responsive. You take the minimal amount of time to deal with them on an issue, taking minimal amount of their time as well as your own, and that you're very you're responsive. You're working on their behalf. You're their emissary. You're moving an issue to resolution, using every interaction as an opportunity to demonstrate that. And this, we think about it, well, customer services are customer service reps, when we get the phone call in from the switchboard. But you need to think about it is that really the customer service represents every touch that the organization makes, from the maintenance mechanic in the trench, in the street, in front of the house, to the general manager and everyone in between. All of those interactions represent teachable moments. So if you put together a branding strategy and you've got 4 or 5 key things that you're committed to the community, when that interaction occurs between the guy or woman cleaning out the trench in the street in order to lay new line, and a neighbor walks by and says, "What are you doing?" That's a wonderful teachable moment right there. Ma'am, sir, this is part of our program to replace old lines to make sure we have water reliability in this neighborhood and meet our commitment to that to you. Simple things like that. It's everyone's job. If you move on and you start looking at elected officials, and many of you report or are certainly accountable to them, I think we all are in some respects, they have a number of issues they're trying to get done. Water is just one of them. So it's not the primary issue that they're dealing with. They need to have balance between their provision of road services or lighting or parks or other social services that are provided for the entire community. So you have to be conscious of that. They want you to be involved with the community. I mean, they don't want the water organizations to feel like they're separate and distinct and standoffish and unapproachable, and so they want that engagement. They don't want to stick out from other communities. They are concerned, particularly when it comes to water rates. If our rates are double what it is in a neighboring community, that's a political problem for them. They like education programs for kids. It's a uniformly positive response we got in discussing with them. And of course, at the end of the day, they are interested in getting reelected, and appearing as though they're not responsive on water issues is not a good way to achieve that. So they have their own set of perspectives. Local government managers are keenly interested in demonstrating that value proposition. They want you to appear and be, in fact, responsive to the environment and press the issues associated with a good water ethic. They want to have information and along the lines of why water rates rise when there's conservation. They want you to be out providing tips and guidance to residents on how they can save water or money. They want it simple, especially in public meetings, consistent, but they also want to have high-tech backup information available in the event you have to pull out the big guns. So generally, simple, consistent messages, but have all of the ammunition you need if you have to really go into a defense of the policies. Be clear on how the money is going to be used whenever issues of rate increases or capital spending are engaged in, and compare and develop what those effects on the water bills actually will be. Be out there relentlessly communicating. So generally be viewed as approachable, consistent in your messaging, tying value proposition to all of the expenditures. Again, in essence, what I talked about earlier is being in the mode of branding your actions as meeting certain commitments to the public. And yet you talk to the utility leaders now, they want trust and credibility in their with all the stakeholders. They are committed to the safe drinking water. They want the community to support what they're doing, and at the end of the day, that support they feel is necessary to get the money to achieve the goals. So if you start thinking about, and these are just four of the kind of stakeholder groups that we deal with, there are obviously many facets of the customer subgroups within the customer base that may have some different objectives. But by and large, these are broad, general desires of these four groups. Now, if you talk about the media, and we did interviews with half a dozen print reporters across the country, from the Tampa area, Denver area, Los Angeles area, and others. Things to think about. They're on deadline. They don't have time to go chasing you down. Oftentimes they want boilerplate information about the utility that they can just pull language into an article. So having a utility website that has a section specifically for the press that allows them real quick access to, what it is you're about and what you do. They want access. They're on deadline. They want to be able to talk to a knowledgeable spokesperson. Generally, they do not want to talk to elected leaders. So in other words, you don't want a commission member or board member or city council person speaking for the water department. They want to talk to the professional that's running the department, the engineer, or but somebody that can be credible from a technical kind of standpoint, knowledgeable. They view the non-government organizations as trustworthy. Ironically, in some cases, I think that they don't give the same credence to the actual utility person. So the other thing you have to be aware is that when you do have newsworthy articles, the media do try to be balanced. Basically, they will get pro and con arguments. So even if 90% of even though 90% of the viewpoints favor what you're doing, they will put the 10% opposition argument. So it may appear as though these are equal weighted. Important to keep in mind. Give them heads up. Keep them, give them newsworthy information. They like that. They have a reputation as print reporters that they take very seriously. And misinformation, unintentional misinformation, they do not look at kindly. And anything you can do to make their water stories more interesting. They typically get engaged if it's a drought or flood, and the rest of the time is kind of boring from their perspective, and those are words they use. Think about the idea of developing what are called evergreen articles that are articles that don't necessarily mesh the news cycle. It's not a drought or flood thing, but they're human interest kinds of things. You've all run across the reporter that's interested in what the lab does. Well, you can have some generic so-called evergreen articles that are useful in all settings that provide great fill-in for a print or news reporter. It's a slow news day, and we've all seen it on TV or radio or in the newspapers as they put in the human interest stories. So if you've got some and can have those ready, they very much appreciate that. Okay. So the planning and the development of these communication plans for communicating the value of water are going to vary by the utility and by the resources you have available, from very elaborate ones to very simple ones. But as a common goal, they all leverage every opportunity that you have to reinforce that desired brand. What's the value proposition? So you got to really think and articulate what those handful of things are that you're going to consistently brand yourself with. What are people getting for their money? And these brand statements become a discussion basis, for you as utility leaders, for your elected and appointed officials and customers. They're the handful of things that you can pull off in the elevator speech when someone asks you, what do you do and what's the department or the utility all about, and more, and I'll talk more about that. So now I want to just go through quickly a communications planning model, and all of this is in the Water Research Foundation report. There's also a toolkit that's got a lot of examples that are very, I think, useful for you all that are contemplating a more formal program or augmenting your existing program. So the first step, and this is just a sequential set of steps, and the first is to really kind of step back and take a look at your current situation and how your utilities position in the community. Usually there's something that stimulates people to say, you know what, we got to get a hold of our communications. Either there's a water quality problem or a water supply problem, and you're starting to get, painted perhaps with brushes that you don't want to be painted with. But basically, there's an initiator of this. So there's a kind of a reflective point at the beginning of the cycle where you're basically saying, look, if we stay where we are with how we're communicating things, we can see a number of things unfold down the road that are really going to challenge us as an organization. We're not going to get the rate increases. We're not going to get the staff we need to maintain the system. We're not going to get the bond ratings that are necessary to get capital. So in the evaluating these existing situations, it's really stepping back. How's the utility perceived? What are those obstacles you face? Who's leading these communications plans? And then who's actually executing it? What's in place to actually make these communication plans happening? And there's some tools that you can use to kind of vet risk in your communications program. And today, we couldn't make this statement 10 years ago, but today this whole notion of your sustainability posture as a utility and how you're projecting that, or if you're projecting it, or if it's important to the community. This is an issue that is coming upon us rapidly. I mean, if you do and review surveys that have been done among different demographic groups with regard to their concern for the environment, we are really at the cusp, I think, of a fundamental shift in the United States as the youngest generations move into positions of authority. I think we're going to move into a much more kind of greener world, if you will. And it's an opportunity, it's a risk combined, but one that you would be unwise to not track in your own community. So the second step has been really you sat back, you've taken a look at what your current risks are and staying with the status quo, and then you sit down and actually give some focused thought to what your utility brand and what your vision for communication of that brand is. As I said earlier, the brand statements are typically will follow in some fashion your strategic plan goals, and I've seen that in a number of cases. I think it's a kind of a trend, if you will. There is some tools out. There are some tools out there. There's national branding information for both AWWA and Water Environment Foundation. But basically, what you're looking at defining is what can the public count on from you. And these are generally concise statements about your commitment to the public. We talked about, infrastructure or financial integrity, our stewardship, environmental transparency. Often four that are both goals for water utilities and then end up being brands. A couple examples here of mission and then brand statements that we don't need to read, but you can review on your own. And again, there are many other examples in the report. And then so we then move on as now that you understand the problem, understand what key messages you're trying, as then you develop some specific communication goals. And the goals are defined, they are specific, they are time frame generated. They can deal with issues of how you're going to position on quality and service, what sustainability attributes you want to put forth, quality of life issues. The values will also include issues related to earning of trust and respect, valuing the customers as owners. And some example goals just listed here are generating public support for programs and rates. In other words, so you want to try as much as possible operationalize where you're trying to get to. And you can be more specific. You want 75% approval rating or positive ratings for the utility among the public in general. You want, 90% of the residents to understand why the capital program is necessary. Not that they'll support the rates, but that they understand the argument. really identifying the needs and the gaps to achieve those communication goals. And what this is really is you know what you want to be, you know what your goals are, and this is that kind of that gap analysis where, you know, what is it, if we want this outcome of having 90% approval for impression of the value of the utility, where are the public, right? So what specifically, how big is that gap? And then that gives you the information to start targeting in on the specific tasks and efforts that you can do to plug that gap. So there's a number of ways to go about determining this. You can do interviews, surveys, focus groups, study teams, workshops, and so on. And then there are a number of specific tools, ultimately, that you can use to try to plug some of those gaps. But this gap analysis is a really important part of the process. All right, then there's an introspective part that says, okay, we know what we want to be. We know what our goals are. We know what people need to know. What is it about? Is there something fundamental about our organization? Are there behavioral things that, you know, we can talk a good story, but, you know, doggone it, we keep having, you know, our utility trucks seen at the donut shop on Monday mornings, and this idea of us saying we're going to be good stewards of financial resources doesn't mesh with the actions that that we have. And I just grabbed one article, this water officials run up a tab, travel expenses cost districts over $1 million. You know, when you're setting a message about how you're going to be, good, efficient stewards, these kinds of things are really damaging, or perhaps even the worst one is that, we're committed to the environment and meeting, drinking water quality regulations, safe water, and last week we had a boil water advisory. These kinds of things people will turn on you real quickly. So, you can assess the current utility and staff behaviors, sometimes going back and looking over the newspaper articles over the last year and how you were viewed, how you were cast, is a good way to do a smell check on how you're viewed, at least for the folks that read the newspapers. Another thing to keep in mind is that a lot of recent college graduates don't read newspapers anymore. They get their information off the internet, or they're involved in blogs. And that's something to just be aware of, how people in your community truly are communicating. Okay, then at that stage of the game, we're identifying behavioral needs and gaps to achieve the goal. So, if there are problems with your organization and accountabilities, for example, or discipline issues, or basically you're not being effective with your current communications programs, there are some internal things that may need to be modified within the utility. Sometimes you can do them simply from a gut check. Man, we're getting a lot of bad press this last couple of years. So there are ways to identify those needs again, and there are gaps that you can use to plug those. And again, there's more detail in the report. And then, okay, so now you've really done your whole situational analysis. You're clear on what your goals are, your brand rather, and then your communication goals are specified. You've got a clear gap analysis done to make sure there aren't fundamental issues in your organization that need to be addressed. And at that point in time, then you're developing and preparing that formal communications plan. And these plans, to be effective, need to be built into your strategic plan. They need to be funded. All the planning in the world is worthless if you don't have the resources to pull it off. So, there's a gut check process here that has to take place. Are we just into sort of talking a good game, but we're really not going to put the money there? What are the most cost-effective ways to get these messages across? Obviously, some evaluation that needs to be done there. The plan could have short-term, mid-term, or long-term elements. It could have elements, and would likely have elements that are targeted and some that are more broadly multimedia. You can use information from AWWA and Water Environment Federation materials. They're available on their websites to reduce some of your local costs, tailor them for your local setting. It could include specific actions to increase positive media coverage And again, there's some toolkit items that I think would be useful. And at the end of the day, then you're monitoring and implementing this, and it's an iterative process. It's not an event. It is revisited over time, periodically. Now, I will tell you, in the course of the study, we talked to a lot of people and got a lot of great ideas. But there was one issue that came up that I thought was really profound, and it was the whole idea. If you think about your water utility bill as a customer, or if you work in a utility, and you get that bill each month and you open it up, and generally they're very complicated documents. Generally, they're the only thing that people look at. They don't look at inserts. They don't look at consumer confidence reports. They focus on the bill, and then they have to wade through all of this information. But profoundly, more often than not, we convey the amount of water use as 100 cubic feet or billing units. And the fundamental issue of communicating value means that people, when they pay for something, have a clue about what it is they bought. And when you bill $40 or $50 for 200 billing units, we have severed the value proposition. People are paying for something that has no meaning to them. And you start thinking about it, and do this when you go home tonight. Look at your water bill and say, is there anything in here that emphasizes what I got? And I think you'll come to the conclusion that no, we've really screwed that process up. So the idea is this. You have to have all that technical information. That's how we read meters. It has to be there for legal purposes, and obviously allow a consumer to do their own calcs and verify the total dollar amount. But that can be buried. It can be in the document. What the consumer should see is my name, my address, how many gallons of water I used, and what the cost per gallon was, and what the total cost was. And then something simple that says, did you know this amount of water is equivalent to 43,000 glasses of water, 400 average showers, 8,000 average toilet flushes. Put in 4 or 5 things that mean something to people, and people all of a sudden start going, you mean I paid $40 and I got 1,000 showers for $40, or I got X number of glasses of water. And then people can start saying, geez, this what I'm paying actually relates to something I'm getting in life, and I value being able to take a shower, and $40 for the right to take, the equivalent of 1,000 of them a month is a screaming deal. So I thought that was just a very profound, just somewhat obvious observation about how we've lost the value proposition in our billing. So continuing on, I talked a little bit about implementing and monitoring. We can keep moving. So, as we roll to a close here, it's important to equate all your actions as a utility, all your communications, every of those touches with the public, equate them with value, and you can do that through your communications plan. Knowing and understanding what your consumers, what your stakeholders' needs are, and tailoring your communications and all the actions you're taking day in and day out to meeting those needs and constantly underpinning that value proposition. It means defining your brand, and this is not overly complicated, but really understanding those handful of things that you're promising to the customers and then living those brands. So it's that internal introspection about what is it that you and your organization are doing that is inconsistent, if anything, with those brands, and fixing those. And at the end of the day, the stronger that your brand is, and the more consistent you are in communicating it, the easier it is to survive what will be inevitable bumps in our business. There is a communications guidance manual. It's in the final report, and it includes the background research. It includes the communications model, some great case studies of some of the participants that I think would be instructive for you all. And then there's a toolkit of some of the example communications material, basic issues of what to include on a website, examples of branding that other utilities have done. And the report was published in August of 2008, so you can get on the Water Research Foundation website and purchase it. If you're a member, you can get that for free. So I will conclude at this point in time. I appreciate all of your attention this afternoon. And again, I want to express thanks to the Water Research Foundation for the support of the research and the Groundwater Foundation for giving me 45 minutes to speak to you this afternoon. With that, Brian, I'm available if anyone has any questions or comments.
Sure, there are some questions out there, and we have some time for that. If you have questions, like I said earlier, be sure that you type them into the box there to the left of the send button down below, and then you'll be able to send it through there. But a couple of questions that have come in relating back a little bit to where you were talking about helping make the bill itself more understandable. Do you know of any utilities that have actually billed by the gallon or some understandable unit, and has that been helpful?
I don't. Nobody, I've mentioned this in a couple settings, and I don't know if anyone's actually taken it up. And so it's an important question. This is coming from the standpoint of speculation and theory, not from actual practice. And so I've given some thought and done some basic calculations. It's not in the report per se, but I'd be happy to share that with whoever's put the questions forth. But basically just doing water equivalents. And again, I'm not saying do away with any of your existing billing protocols. All that's there. But really the thing that they see up front is very simplified that ties the price to the bill. And then if they want the gory detail, they just go to page 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. But no, to answer you directly, I have not seen anybody implement this yet. And would be interested if anyone has and what effects they've seen.
I've seen somebody popped on and said that Sydney Water uses liter units in billing.
Mm-hmm.
So there's one example of it that we've seen. But
yeah. Okay, good. Thank you.
Another question is, where was when I saw? Oh, you were talking about the bottled water a little bit.
Yeah.
How can a utility fight that trend, and can branding be used to increase the value of tap water?
On the former, it's interesting since these Aquafina and other ads were done. A couple things have come up, and it's sort of interesting to watch. Bottled water sales have plateaued now, and in fact, I believe they're actually dropping down a little bit. Part of this, at least, is due to the campaigns that have been waged by the non-government organizations on the energy associated with transporting water, with the plastic disposal of plastics that it creates a huge waste problem. And I think most people are more aware of that these days. You've also seen an explosion of these like Brita water filter pitchers that more folks are using. And so, bottled water sales, which it really eclipsed sweetened soft drink sales over the last handful of years, are now looking like they're plateauing. I think there's also an issue associated with affordability and the economy and all of that. But, combating those kinds of issues, I think there's a couple things. One is, convenience is important for a lot of folks that drink bottled water. And they also, about a quarter of the folks that I've seen in some surveys that have been done in Southern California drink it out of safety concerns. So there's a couple angles. One is, the value of the tap water product is it meets or surpasses all drinking water standards. Okay, and that is a safe bet. It is safe as measured by all the things we have to measure safety. Two is that it is an amazing bargain compared to $1 or whatever a bottle of water costs these days. Three is that if you there's nothing wrong with someone having a aesthetic preference for water in a bottle or a point-use device or whatever. Oftentimes times people will connote safety by the appearance, by the smell, by the taste. In fact, some research has been done to show that, chlorinated water is perceived as more unsafe than unchlorinated water just because of the chlorinous taste, the chemical taste. So, there's some things you can do on the taste and odor side. Water, color and water, again, going back tens of thousands of years, where we didn't have analytical instruments. All we could do was, did it smell, look, or taste funny? And that was a pretty important survival mechanism for us. So those kinds of aesthetic parameters are important. Paying attention to those, minimizing those off flavors or off tastes. There's technology solutions there. Yeah, they cost money. But in one example, in Tucson, there were actual large surveys done about whether people wanted to have a utility install RO to reduce the TDS of the water coming into the system to more match their groundwater that they'd historically grown, quite fond of. And it was really a mixed bag at the end of the day. There's those that once they were educated as to what it cost and what they got, didn't feel it was a good bargain. So some steps there. And then there was one other part to that, Brian, and I unfortunately I didn't write it down, but some branding issues that you can do or methods you can combat bottled water. Yep. And improving the perception of the quality of the tap water.
You talked a little bit about those teachable moments. Do you know of any cities in particular that have done a good job getting employees on board to, when they're out there, when they're down in the ditch, to teach the public?
Those really are kind of works in progress in a lot of utilities. I've been impressed with some of the strategic work and workforce work of folks like Colorado Springs Utilities. There are a number out there that are good, but I haven't seen really well-developed and solid programs that are actually engaging the frontline employees. A lot of work done on customer service representatives. I think people are doing really good jobs there. Tucson Water has spent a lot of time working and training their customer service representatives, and many utilities have. I haven't seen sort of our utility 101A branding and messaging, to push down deeper into organization. I'm sure there are some examples. I just don't know the names of them. Every employee ought to have a card in their wallet that says these are the 4 or 5 things that we are trying to accomplish. And when you interact with customers, weave these into your interaction. And that's a very simple thing. It doesn't require a lot of training and getting, well, one other thing is that, when you're developing new employees, when you're hiring new employees, in employee orientations, these are the kinds of messaging that you want to put in place with your employees. So right out of the blocks, you're getting them used to the idea that, when you interact with the community, here are the big things we need you to do. And that changes over time as new initiatives in a utility arise, so it's dynamic.
Another question relates a little bit to social media. What type of weight should a utility give to social media, and can they use that as a kind of an instant commentary and assessing those behavioral needs or gaps in the situation?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And, I have to admit that I'm not a big participant. I do some on Facebook and MySpace and stuff, but not huge. So you take that for what it's worth. But I will tell you that I ran across a methodology that the U.S. Air Force uses as a documented specific set of steps that the various bases are to take whenever they run across a blog that says anything, disparaging about the Air Force. And it is a rigorous, very serious, here's what you do kind of thing. And I think, from what I have read from a number of different papers, and this is really at the knee of the curve of learning about how these things are, is that, it's very easy and very fast for negative information to spread on a weblog. So if you have local activists that are angry with what you're doing information. I'm not saying you have a fleet of folks working at keyboards to, combat everyone who says something ill about you. But you do not want to let, gross misinformation go unanswered. Even if it's simply leaving a message that says, for those of you that are really interested in what's happening, you can go to www.waterutility.org, and we've got a full discussion of all the issues, and it's best to consider the facts in these. There's ways to, without engaging in a he said, she said thing, that you can do that, but be aware of it, and because it can very much damage your reputation very quickly. And there's numbers of examples in the media, where the web logs are really becoming the source of breaking news stories. So they're not to be underestimated. Some folks I know have looked at Twitter, Twitter have set up some Twitter capability, from what I gather. I believe the city of San Diego, maybe the San Diego County Water Authority has looked into it, and I believe they're, contemplating that. Some utilities have MySpace pages. I think it's something to look into. The media, the way people get information is shifting as generations, succeed each other.
Another person asked, it's probably the last question, how do you know when you succeeded with your awareness campaign or communicating that, and how have you seen to measure that success?
Yeah. Well, I'm a pretty big fan of doing, focus groups, and they don't need to be, they can be informal, they can be formal, where you're actually, buying, a group of 40 people dinner, and they come in and there's, set things about how you view the utility, and you have structured, feedback mechanisms. People are very busy these days, and voluntary, survey tools get you the people that are willing to, that have time on their hands and that are willing to participate. They can give you a very skewed view. Phone polls are getting more and more flawed because more and more people, particularly young people, don't have but a cell phone, and so you're not surveying huge chunks of the population. Internet surveys don't capture, in many cases, the elderly. They're not, or big chunks of the Latino community that don't have access to computers or other groups. So using multiple venues, pulling actual customers in, if it's for a sandwich over lunch, we want an hour of your time, to just talk about, how we're doing in the community, pays huge dividends. There are more scientific methods in terms of polling that you can do. Relying on one source is probably a mistake. But satisfaction kinds of surveys can be done. You can track it over time. There are examples out there of folks that do them every 1 or 2 years. I'm a fan of that. At the end of the day, I like, if you can afford it and take the time, it's the face-to-face stuff is really powerful, because not only do you get the feedback, but you begin developing relationships and ties to the community as the utility, and it gives you an opportunity to press your brand. So it's truly two-way.
Definitely. Well, I want to thank you, Ed, and thank everyone for attending today's webinar, co-sponsored by the Water Research Foundation. And as we conclude today's webinar, you'll receive a survey evaluation via email from us. If you'll take the time to fill that out and give us some of your thoughts on that. And we do have a few webinars on demand from the past few months that we've given that you can check out on our website at groundwater.org. This webinar will be available on demand as well with Ed, and what you'll do is you'll receive a coupon code to access that on-demand version for free, and that coupon code will be included in that survey email that you receive from us. So if you don't receive that code, make sure that you contact me, and I can be contacted at webinar@groundwater.org. So I'd like to thank you again. You can find out more information about the Groundwater Foundation at groundwater.org, or we're on Facebook as well, and Twitter and LinkedIn and all those different sites. And if you'd like to reach out to Ed, there's his email as well to get in touch with him. So with that concludes today's webinar. I want you all to have a great day, and thanks again, Ed.
Okay, very good. Good day, all.